Plenary of ISDC. As you can see, we have an amazing panel for you, quite a crew here. I hope you all have your questions lined up. I'm gonna introduce Rod Pyle. Here's our moderator, also our world-famous author. He'll sign books for you at a fee, right? Or
hey, good idea. Thanks.
Yeah, I thought I'd give you a pitch there. All right, so let's get the show on the road. Rod?
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Thanks for driving out here. For those of you that did, it's not a pretty thing in LA. How many people are local? Oh, wow, I'm amazed you actually got here on time. Just to contextualize for all of us, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I used to commute to UCLA in the 1970s. And from downtown Pasadena to parking on campus was shorter than it was to walk from the dorms at UCLA to the campus. It took me 35 minutes. And I don't know about you, but the last time I did it in rush hour is 2.5 hours. So welcome to our fair city for those of you who don't live here. So we're here to talk about media and space and how we pursue spaceflight media. I overdid it on the panel a bit because I wanted to get really good people from each area, but they don't outnumber you, so that's good. But I wanted to get a variety of viewpoints because so often we talk about space media, we think about TV, we think about magazines, we think about books, which is what I do primarily. But I thought I really want to broaden this out, so I included some visual artists and some scientific practitioners and a bunch of really fascinating people, and I'm going to try and not talk very long so we can hear what they've got to say instead of what I have to say.
That'll be a first.
That's Geoff Notkin. We'll introduce him last. So, the battle for the hearts and minds of the American public have been really going on since the beginning of the space age, which I'm sad to say I'm old enough to remember. And there's a few questions. I do a lot of late night AM radio, and we get call-ins. So in the second hour of Coast to Coast, after you're done talking about, you know, aliens and shadow governments and conspiracies and Bitcoin and all that stuff, the people call in during the truck drive across Tennessee. And they ask questions like, why do we spend money to go into space? Why risk people investment for something so uncertain and I can't see tangible returns? And finally, of course, and increasingly, what's in it for me? And these are hard questions to answer, and they're things that we've been talking about in the space media since I got involved in the 90s. These are questions that NASA's been trying to answer since the 1950s. And I'll ask my JPL colleagues here what they think, but it's been hard to do. And it's a difficult conversation to have, especially when you're not really mandated to do a whole lot of public outreach, which is the case with NASA. Public support comes and goes. You know, there's a popular notion that during the 1960s, when we were ramping up to the first moon landing, that the nation was united behind Apollo and that we were this solid phalanx of people completely committed to going to the moon. And that's just not how it was. I was old enough to understand, I'm old enough to remember, public support came and went. You know, there was and you could look at the polls, you don't have to take my word for it. I've gone through them many more times than I care to recall. Jumped up when Kennedy made his announcement that we're going to the moon. Began to decline as we were spending money and working through the early parts of the Gemini program. We had a spacewalk, bumped up again, began to wane a little bit, and this continued throughout. You know, we had the Apollo fire, we had the first lunar landing, big spike for Apollo 13, and I remember watching the moonwalks of Apollo 14 because my parents were kind enough to let me stay home from school. And by the time we were halfway through that moonwalk and the networks realized that nobody was going to be in trouble in space and maybe die, we were watching soap operas and I Love Lucy reruns, and that was the end of seeing the moonwalk. So this has been the struggle we've had ever since. I think that sort of personifies it kind of perfectly. So now we find ourselves in this new space age, and I think I was doing a talk a year ago and I kept telling this group of young people, you're going to see this new space age really soon, it's almost here, it's almost here. And then a few months ago I saw the Falcon Heavy take off and land, and I thought, okay, it's here. So the last couple of talks I did, I got to say, it has arrived, we're here. And this makes our job a little easier because we've got Elon Musk sending off rockets. I don't know, I think the last year was, what, 12, 14 launches? 18? A bunch, yeah. And now we've got the Falcon Heavy operational. So this stuff's exciting. And how much better PR can you do than putting your car in orbit around the Earth and then sending it off to Martian orbit? So you know, regardless of what you think of that, I think it was the most brilliant PR move I've seen since Sputnik. So I'm going to stop talking, but you know, we have to figure out how to convey the beauty and the excitement of what's going on in space. But it can be very complicated, and we don't want to oversimplify it, but we also don't want to bore people to death, because most of us aren't writing for tech journals. We're writing for popular media or working in a popular media setting. We have to learn how to move beyond rockets and clickbait to delve into the deeper meaning of all this and answer that question that's been spinning around for 60 years, very simply: why space? So I'm going to let these fine folks introduce themselves, because if I do it, I'll be talking until the end of the session. First we have Geoff Notkin. Next we have Calla Cofield, Dan Goods, Rick Sternbach, Mike Clark, Matt Kaplan, and my good friend Pascal Lee. So why don't you each take a couple minutes and talk about what you do and how you do it.
Thank you, Rod.
Anytime.
Wonderful intro.
Sure thing.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Geoff Notkin. I am a member of the Board of Governors of the mighty National Space Society, which sponsors this event, why we're all here, of course. I'm a columnist for Ad Astra, our official magazine, science writer. I'm a television host and producer. If I look slightly familiar, you imagine me covered in mud standing next to a very tall guy, because I was one of the 2 hosts of Meteorite Men for several years for Discovery Channel. I traveled all over the world looking for celestial garbage that's fallen out of space and landed on our Earth. So I spent a lot of my life doing public service, cleaning up space garbage. You're welcome. And I am a meteorite specialist, of course, and film producer, mostly documentaries. One of the projects I'm working on at the moment is Paul Hildebrandt's next film, First to the Moon, the Apollo 8 story. And those of you who were at ISDC in St. Louis last year might have seen his wonderful film, Fight for Space. And our artists will be interested to know I'm also a graduate of New York City's School of Visual Arts. So we have a lot in common. Thrilled to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. And I'm glad that I was before you instead of after you, because I always hate being after you because you're good. Calla.
Hi, I'm Calla Cofield. I've been a science communicator for about 10 years in various capacities. Most recently, I was a reporter for Space.com for 3 years, and then about 3 months ago, I joined the media relations office at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is kind of full circle to me, because I began in the communications office at SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory in the Bay Area. I'll keep it to that. I have a much shorter resume.
It's a really good one, right?
I'm Dan Goods, and I lead something called the Studio at the Jet Propulsion Lab. And we're not engineers, we're not scientists, we're a bunch of artists and designers and thinkers and makers. And if you've seen any of the travel posters that are up on the screen, we did those. We were trying to think about, we sort of created the Exoplanet Travel Bureau, and thinking about all these planets that we found around other stars, and how do you get people to dream about them and think about them. And so we kind of went after like the old 30s posters, travel posters. And so like Kepler 16b is a real planet around a binary star, so it's like a Tatooine. And what's special about it? Well, it has 2 suns, right? And so if you were a travel agent, you might say the land of 2 suns, where your shadow always has company, right? And then, so in one of them, there's another one, Kepler 186f, and if you were a planet around that sun, your foliage wouldn't actually be green, it'd be red because of the kind of sun that it has. And so this is where the grass is always redder on the other side, right? And then there's one as PSO J318.5-22, which is like rolls off the tongue, right? Well, that's a planet that doesn't have a sun. And so the scientists were like, how are we ever gonna get people interested in this one? Because it's really, who would want to go to a planet without a sun? Well, this is where the nightlife never ends, right? And so we do a bunch of different types of projects. JPL runs the Deep Space Network for NASA, and so all the data that goes to and from spacecraft go through this room at JPL. Many of you guys may have been there before. I get a live feed from that room, and we created a sculpture that responds to that information. And so every time, whenever we are receiving data, lights are coming down, and whenever we're sending data, lights are going up. And the amount of data that we're sending and receiving is represented by how much light is going back and forth. So Voyager, we still get, we still transfer information with Voyager all the time, but it sort of looks like it's broken because Voyager can hardly send any data back and forth, right? Whereas other spacecraft can send back lots of information back and forth. And so every 20 seconds it switches to a different spacecraft that we happen to be communicating with at that moment. And so this is in the main administration building at JPL, and it really kind of gives a sense of the heartbeat of space exploration. And if this is a very visual way of talking about things, we've also worked on things that are use a different sense. And so this is a giant seashell that's at the Huntington Gardens. It's here in the LA area. And a seashell is a listening device. And but in this particular listening device, you walk inside and we have this sort of surround sound on steroids inside. And wherever you hear a sound, that's the exact location of an Earth orbiting satellite that NASA has. And so we're tracking, where all those things are. We worked with a sound composer. I don't know if we can hear any of the sound, but he made a, no, that's background. That's, there we go. Yeah, so he created a voice for these 19 different satellites that NASA has that studies the Earth. And each one sort of says hello whenever it happens to be in the northern hemisphere. And it became a very relaxing space. People go in there, they close their eyes, and they think about this, whole world of satellites that happen to be around us, and realize that, oh, NASA actually studies the Earth. I didn't know that. So we call this whole area sneaking up on learning. So it's things that are beautiful, mysterious, that kind of draw you in, and then hopefully you're in the right mindset for learning. And then there's one voice that sort of has voices in it, and that's the International Space Station. And I remember one night going out at dusk, and I could actually see the International Space Station, and then we could hear it. And that was a beautiful moment, one, because then we knew it actually worked. We weren't just faking, but to know that there are actually people up there. It's beautiful.
Before you go, Rick, I just want to say one thing. You can kill music, thank you. Much as I liked it. I work at JPL about half-time, and I go to Building 180 occasionally, which is where that light sculpture is installed. And I worked at Griffith Observatory for a long time, and I used to watch kids go look at our not very good exhibits there, and they'd kind of, push the button a couple of times and walk away when it didn't blow up or light up or something. But I watched people look at that light sculpture, and if you're talking about the general public, not those in the know, they stand there for a moment and they kind of furrow their brow and they sort of look around, and then once they get it, there's this sort of flush of realization. And it really is a magic moment, and I think we need one in every shopping mall. So that's something for you all to work on. You want to talk about forwarding our cause, that's a good way to go. Rick.
Okay. Well, I'm Rick Sternbach. I'm an illustrator and model maker who started out getting inspired by space as a kid. When I was 8 years old, on TV, there was a show called Men into Space. And Chesley Bonestell did pre-production design work, and I was just astounded. I saw Bonestell's art in books at my elementary school, so Conquest of Space was like, oh my God, I have to read this cover to cover. I grew up watching science fiction movies on TV. Mr. Wizard, and I grew up in front of the television, so it's kind of not surprising that I ended up working in film and television later on. I'm kind of split down the middle. Half of me is into real space, astronomy, planetary geology. And the other half of me is into deeply into science fiction. So, I could talk, I and my space artist colleagues, we can talk to some of our pals like Dr. Bill Hartman about cratering densities on Mars, and then the other half of me can tell you how warp drive works. Okay. I took a 15-year detour with Paramount Pictures as a senior illustrator and tech consultant for the Star Trek franchise. So we kept the writers honest. You know, we fed them lots of memos. We offered them nicely. You know, we told them how the transporter works. You know, we told them how replicators might work, how the holodeck might work. And, you know, lo and behold, there are people trying to make a holodeck now. You know, you know, we came up with hand props and, you know, all the control panel stuff, and tried to explain in fairly simple terms how a lot of the technology works on Trek. But for me, it was all inspiration from, you know, watching the original series or watching space missions on television. I love telling people, you know, I was around as a kid when there was nothing in orbit. Nothing was up there yet. Okay, so we've seen it all happen. When I graduated high school in 1969, I told my folks, I have to go to the Cape. I have to go to the Cape. So I went to see Apollo 11 take off with about 1 million other people, maybe 9 miles away from the pad. I tried to get to 12, but you know, school interfered with that. But I got a press pass for 13. And watching a Saturn V take off from the press site was just the most astounding experience. And that sort of interest, that sort of inspiration has just never left me. So I've painted real space, I've painted science fiction, and you know, all of these visual products are meant to give something to the audience, to inspire. You know, I've talked to kids about a lot of this stuff. The International Association of Astronomical Artists, IAAA, we are having an art exhibit over in the California pre-function area, so please come and see what all of us have been doing. And I'll leave you with one quick little story. Before Apollo 11, I discovered that Paul Calais, a NASA artist, lived 4 blocks from me in Stamford, Connecticut. So I cold called him. I asked him very nicely, you know, could I possibly come and talk to you about your art? It's wonderful. My dad and I got to drive out to his studio, a couple of towns away. You know, converted barn. You know, the pure New England art studio. And you know, he's showing off his pencil renderings and the wonderful, huge, long painting of Armstrong coming down the ladder. He hadn't yet finished it, and I got to see it for real. And there were little tiny pebbles worked into the oil paint. It was just astounding. And then he stopped talking, and he said, "You realize why I'm doing this, don't you?" Yeah, I kind of had to, you know, I gulped a little bit. And he said, "Because you're going to have to do it too." And that has been, you know, that has stayed with me ever since. So, you know, come and talk to us at the Space Art Exhibit, and we will tell you everything you want to know.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm a bit jealous working on Star Trek and seeing a Saturn V. Wow. Yeah. My name is Michael Clark. I consider myself a regular person who eventually became in the know. I work for a YouTube channel called TMRO, and I have been doing YouTube for several years talking about what's been going on in the spaceflight industry, trying to communicate, especially to my friends and my peers, of why this is important and why this is cool and why you should care about this. And one thing led to another. I eventually worked for a website called moonandback.com, where we got to travel around to space conferences like this and interview some of my heroes, and it's just been a really incredible journey. And I have to say, since you brought up Star Trek, that Jean-Luc Picard definitely was my TV dad. So that might tell you a few things about me. But one of the big things of why I am doing this is because I believe that spaceflight is the most important noble activity that humanity is engaged in right now. And growing up in the 80s and seeing kind of the last tail end of the Cold War, seeing what we've accomplished with the International Space Station and just all of the different collaboration that's going on worldwide, I truly believe that spaceflight is the method to which humanity will eventually have peace. And I know that sounds like a very naive, idealist thing to say, but I mean, it brings people together. And I think it's incredible that I can have a conversation from someone from Iran talking about their human spaceflight program, which is on hold, and have a really awesome conversation. And like politics might come up a little bit, religion might come up a little bit, but it doesn't matter because we're focused on the more important thing. And I feel like that's a really great example worldwide of how spaceflight brings everyone together. So why I'm doing this is to try to communicate that and try to make sense of all the different technical details and why we should care about this particular type of rocket fuel versus that particular type of rocket fuel. And my whole engagement is, of course, in rocket and propulsion and human spaceflight and eventually getting us to our future, our Star Trek future. So yeah, that's why I'm doing this.
I'm so proud to be part of this group and all of you, because we are all here because we share what my boss, the science guy, the CEO of the Planetary Society, calls the passion, beauty, and joy of space. And he likes also to say space brings out the best in us. I'm Matt Kaplan. I, for 15.5 years now, have hosted Planetary Radio, which we think is the most popular independent podcast about space exploration. The Independent lets us exclude NASA and the BBC because they have a couple of shows that beat us. So, and it's been absolutely delightful. As some of you heard me say yesterday at lunch, I actually started with the NSS. There are a couple of people in the room, including Dennis in the back there who's shooting video, who remember that we did a television show about space on no budget at all in, what, the 80s? Mid-80s? Late 80s? Something like that. Crazy stuff. I've been feeling the passion, beauty, and joy ever since I was a little tiny kid running to watch, you know, Mercury and Gemini and Apollo launches. But the other thing that brought me into this is the work of the visual artists. I remember opening books in our tiny storefront library, and there were the illustrations by Chesley Bonestell. And now, still being inspired by the work of people like this. Those posters, we are crazy about those posters at the Planetary Society. We are just nuts about them. I love them to death. Rick, who has, I've got a print, one of Rick's prints in my office, and it's dolphins in spacesuits who've rendezvoused with one of the Voyagers and are like examining it. You know, they've caught up with it with their interstellar spacecraft. They'll stop on the way to Proxima Centauri or something, I guess. And he tells me there are humans in the spaceship as well, so it's okay. We're there too. You know, thanks for all the fish. It's the inspiration that you guys have provided. And there was a guy, I don't know if he's here and I won't remember his name, who did a session yesterday, had these amazing visualizations of space settlements, the kinds of stuff Gerard K. O'Neill, you know, liked to publicize that excited so many of the people in this room years ago. Absolutely gorgeous. I'll have to find his name because it was so good.
I think you're talking about Brian Vestine.
I am, indeed. Thank you. Absolutely amazing work. So, and he is here. Stand up. There he is, right there. Amazing work. Chuck, go look at his portfolio. What is the website? Spacehabs.com. Take a look, you won't be sorry. Okay, I should talk about Planetary Radio, right? Because that's why I'm here. And I'm wearing the hat. I have two reasons to wear the hat, by the way. One, so that none of you will know I'm bald, but also because whenever Bill Nye sees a picture of me at a public event wearing the hat, he gives me $5. So we've been doing Planetary Radio for about 15.5 years. I'll tell you, it's my dream job because I get paid to talk to heroes. And that's really, it's for those selfish reasons that I do the show. because I want to share the passion, beauty, and joy that I have felt for as long as I can remember. And this is, I can't do what the artists do, and so I talk to people. I ask them questions, and I help them bring their stories out. And it's that, yeah, we cover the science, not as well as people like Geoff Faust, but we do cover the science, and we cover the technology and the things that are happening. But most of all, what we can do, because radio and podcasting now are such personal media, we can let people tell their stories, and we can let you know that these are not, you know, white-coated, distant, geeky, well, some of them are geeky, people, men and women lots of women now, an increasing number. They are people who love life and love what they do and love to share it for the most part. And that's what we try to do with Planetary Radio, as we also share stuff from my colleagues at the Society, like Emily Lakdawala and Bruce Betts and others like Bill Nye who work with me there. It's great fun, and I love doing it.
Great. Okay, hi, I'm Pascal Lee again, in case you missed that part. I'm here because I think, well, why am I here actually, Rod? I'm here because I'm a planetary scientist. I work mostly on Mars and now occasionally moon analogs. And we go in particular to the Arctic, but we really roam the Earth, and that's actually one of the nice things about the job. You get to see the planet and try to understand these other places we'd like to go visit more. For me, one of the prime attractions of the planet Mars is the landscape. And sure, there's the quest for alien life, there's the human future in space, but the place itself is really very beautiful. And thankfully we now have all these fantastic images of the surface of Mars, but I've been also lucky enough to work in some places on the Earth where there are landscapes that are amazing and in some cases really similar to what we're seeing on Mars. So one of those places is Devon Island in the Arctic. And so for the past 22 years, I've lived in California for 22 years. I have yet to spend a summer on a beach in California. Every summer we go up to Devon Island in the Arctic to be on this place that we call Mars on Earth. And Devon is the largest uninhabited island on our planet. It's about the size of West Virginia. Even West Virginia has more population than Devon Island. And once you are there, you are just faced with this bleak, you know, the expression that comes to mind is how Buzz Aldrin describes the moon, the magnificent desolation. It's bleak, it's barren, it's godforsaken. And yet, it is such a fantastic set to learn how to explore Mars. And so we do science and we do exploration. A few years ago, we started a program to really learn how to do traverses on Mars and on the moon with pressurized rovers. When you think about it, one of the key things we'll have to do once we've set up a base on the moon or Mars is to roam around and go check out interesting sites. So how do you go about doing that? You're going to need a pressurized rover. And we have zero experience really to date, other than a few incidental experiences on how to really plan these road trips, how to manage them. It's going to be very different from planning even the lunar rover excursions that we had on Apollo, which were very short range, short term, compared to these long road trips with pressurized rovers. So a few years ago, we transferred one of the 2 Humvees that we're using on Devon Island ourselves to Devon Island by driving it in the winter on sea ice. We use these recycled military ambulance Humvees that are donated to us by AM General, the maker of Humvees. And they are actually scaled the right way. They have the right interior configuration for pressurized rovers. And so this second one that we were needing on Devon Island was driven to Devon Island on the sea ice in the winter. And we thought it would be a piece of cake. But that wasn't the case. It turned out to be relatively epic. And thankfully, we had a film crew with us. National Geographic declined because they found out too late that we were leaving. Discovery Channel declined because they found out too late that we were leaving. But we weren't sure that we were leaving because we didn't have a budget in place until the very last minute. So this was a shoestring project. So thankfully a group of young movie makers that I knew who don't have these big production company schedules to burden them said, yes, we're on board, we'll send one cameraman. And the guy shot continually during the entire expedition. And for the images alone of the Arctic, I would suggest you check out this movie. It's called Passage to Mars. It's the journey of this Humvee across the Arctic to reach Devon Island. And obviously, we, the crew and the team, were not photogenic enough, so Buzz Aldrin was brought on board to augment the cast. Charlotte Rampling reads a few lines from Ray Bradbury. And then even my voice was dubbed and voiced over by Mr. Spock 2.0, Zachary Quinto. But hey, none of these were my decisions. This is where you sort of accept some trades with the business of selling a movie, because ultimately it has to sell. And I don't know that it actually sold the movie, but the point though is that in case you have nothing better to do, I'd suggest you take a look at Passage to Mars. Next slide. I just want to throw in here, while I have the mic, a couple of quick comments on how exploration is portrayed in movies. This is from the movie The Martian, which when I look at it, because it's so close to my day job, I'd like to say that I really can't bear catching all the flaws and issues that I see in the design of the various elements. I'm not denying the benefit that it does for public outreach in a sort of a broad sense, but for example, this is exactly how you do not want to design a pressurized rover. The shapes are angular when in fact the pressurized rover really needs to be a pressure vessel, and for the same reason why your propane tank under your barbecue is rounded, and airplanes have rounded fuselages, you really don't want something that looks like that if you can avoid it. Second, the guy that goes on EVA here, every time he goes on EVA, he has to open the door of the pressurized rover wide. And so the entire oxygen budget in his cabin is flushed out into the Martian surface. And it's a very wasteful way of going in and out of your vehicle. The third thing is that he's wearing a spacesuit and he's going in and out in his spacesuit. The spacesuit, meanwhile, is covered with Martian dust. The Martian dust is toxic. It's got peroxides, perchlorates. Over time, you're going to dust up your whole cabin. It's a nightmare to do EVAs like this. Next slide is showing you what NASA has been doing. And I actually was lucky to be the first scientist pilot of this contraption a few years ago when we tested it in Arizona. So number one, you can see the rounded shape of your pressure vessel whenever possible. Second, next slide, if you look at how you go on EVAs, the spacesuits are docked rearwards with their backpacks inserted into the habitat at the rear of the vehicle. The spacesuits stay outside at all times. You never bring them into the habitable space. And you enter and exit your spacesuit through the rear. These are rear entry suits. In other words, you swing open the backpack like a refrigerator door, and then you climb in legs first, your feet go down to the boots, you insert your arms, you close the backpack door behind you, and off you walk off. And of course, there's a double door behind each spacesuit here to seal the rover as well when you're gone. In any case, this way you never flush out the oxygen or the atmosphere that you have inside your habitat every time you go out on an EVA, nor do you bring the dust into the cabin where you live. But of course, that's not how the movie is. So a movie that has a good design for pressurized rover has yet to be made. In case some of you out here are into movie productions, the real good Mars sci-fi movie has yet to be made, in my view. Next slide. Now, the other thing I wanted to convey quickly with a 1-minute video is the fact that drones are revolutionizing how my teammates and I are able to convey the beauty of Devon Island to the public. Most of our images of Mars are aerial, so these are pictures of Devon Island from drones. our base here. This is the Halton Mars Project base in Devon. It's the largest privately operated polar research station in the world. But it needs funding, so anybody out there as well? Okay. So these are little clips that we're starting to create with drones, and drones are giving us sort of the way to convey the beauty, I think, of Devon Island and the rest. And then one final slide, just a quick comment. This year we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it's my favorite movie of all times. But I wanted to point out one interesting fact that has never been conveyed in any science fiction movie yet. We're familiar with the scene where the astronaut is training and running in the spinning station. And of course, the astronaut stays connected to the ground because there's a centrifugal force that's exerted on him from the spinning station. But that's only if he's running in the direction that the station is spinning. If the astronaut were to run in the opposite direction to counter the rotation rate of the space station, he would actually be able to launch, he or she would be able to launch him or herself into microgravity or zero G. And so this would be, there's an amazing sort of physical environment here that has yet to be really described and captured in film. So another suggestion.
It's always the guy in the back of the room that's going to mess with your visual effects. So I'm going to recycle back to the beginning here. This is the short answer round. And here's my question. We're living in a very crowded media environment. There's more of it than ever. It's very segmented. It's very busy. If I go on Huffington Post, between stories, I've got to look at pictures of ugly fruit that says this one weird trick will cure your facial rash forever and all this kind of stuff. It's hideous, right? So we got to cut through this noise to get our message across. We've got to, I think, do a better job of talking to hearts versus minds. We've been talking to minds for a long time when it comes to space. Not all of us, not you guys, but me and a lot of other people. And we want to tell a story versus just relating facts. So if you could each just give me a short answer on how you think we can best accomplish this. You've kind of touched on it already, but just a little more detail maybe. You can start, Geoff.
The biggest problem we have, Rod, is signal to noise ratio. There is so much material out there now because of the leveling of the creativity platform. In a sense, the idea of independent publishing and independent music has now spread to television and film production. So digital recording equipment, digital editing equipment is cheap and affordable. Anyone who's got a little bit of skill can get a digital camera and go shoot a film and edit it on their laptop and post it on YouTube, which is wonderful in the sense that it allows creators the opportunity to make things without a multi-million-dollar budget, and it's bad because now everyone's a filmmaker. So there's so much material out there, it's hard to find something that merits your time. And so my answer to your question is quality programming. I know it seems obvious, but putting heart and caring into what you're making to create a show, a documentary, a series, a short film, whatever it would be, radio show, artwork that people care about. And how you do that is the difficult part. It's believing in it, it's investing the time. And I also think it is extremely important to network with real people, as we are doing right now. Most of us here probably have social media accounts, in some cases, many social media accounts. And even with the most remarkable story, it's sometimes difficult to get any attention at all. Sometimes you'll send out a tweet or a Facebook post and nothing will happen. And another thing, you might announce your new film and there's just, oh, there's 2 likes ago. That's it, I spent a year on that film. And then you take a photograph of your cat and it gets 100,000 likes. So maybe we should just make films about our cats. That might be the answer. So building solid connections with people that we care about. I mean, I know a couple of our panel members and our host personally, and what do we do when we go to things like this? We talk about things that we care about. And in my introduction, I mentioned Paul Hildebrandt's new film because I care about it, and it deserves attention because he's a marvelous filmmaker, and he's telling the incredible story of Apollo 8. And telling all of you about this film that I believe in, I think is a lot more effective than sending out a tweet about it. I'm not saying you shouldn't network social media. I think we all have to do that. Most of us have to do that. So a combination. Caring with your heart and doing the best you can in what you're making, and sending out the news in an effective way. Perhaps a combination of public dialogue and media promotion.
So many aspects of effective communication are things that once you say them out loud, they seem very obvious. But a really transformative thing for me as a writer, I started as a physics writer, and so I spent a lot of my time worrying about what does my audience know? Do they know what an electron is? Do I have to explain what an atom is or what low Earth orbit is? And when I went to work for Space.com, we have such a broad audience, and I was having to connect with a very general public, as we call it. And instead of thinking about what they knew, I really started to think about when are they reading this and why are they reading it? Is it the end of a long day? Have they had an exhausting day at work and having to put the kids to bed? And they have 30 minutes and they're giving it to me. This is the precious part of their day. Am I giving them something that they can enjoy at that point in their day? And something that they can learn from and be entertained by. And I think that effectively boils down to I stopped lecturing to my audience and started having a dialogue with them and thinking about the questions that they had and the desires that they had. Moving into media relations, that translates to if we have a mission that we're working on, instead of thinking about how we're going to organize the information as if it were for a formal report, I tell the scientists, instead of thinking about the facts that you want people to leave with, think about the fact that you want them to leave thinking this mission is interesting and this mission is justified. I understand why people are spending time on it. That doesn't mean that you start doing clickbait. It means that you take the stories that you're passionate about and you start to think of them in a different framework. It's a lot of work to convey technical stories to someone who, again, is at the end of their day and they can very quickly scan away from your story and go to a different one or go to a different video. So it's a lot of work to reach those audiences with those tough stories, but it is doable. And I think Dan's group has done that so amazingly well. I was having a conversation with a scientist on lab, and I noted that when I started writing about physics, I think the really hot topics in astrophysics were black holes and dark matter and dark energy. Those could always sort of catch people's attention, and I think it's shifted now to exoplanets. I think that's the really exciting astrophysics topic. And I sort of wondered why that was, and this scientist said, I think black holes and dark matter and things like that tap into wonder. Exoplanets tap into hope. And getting at those emotions, again, I think comes back to having a dialogue with the audience and recognizing what it is that they're actually seeing in your product and what you are actually seeing. I think hearing from the panel here, those are things that have fundamentally motivated us, and they've just come in different forms. Yeah, I think I'll end there.
I remember when I first got to JPL, I was really intimidated. I didn't do well in high school. I had like a 2.98 GPA. I slept through 2 classes. I ended up going to an art school. I did well there, and I ended up getting to intern at Caltech. But I was still like this odd person, and I'd go into a meeting, and I'd have no idea what they're talking about. And I'd leave the meeting, and I'd ask the person next to me, so, "What they talk about?" And the guy would say, "I don't know." And I was like, "What do you mean you don't know?" And I realized that, you get a whole bunch of super smart people in the room. They don't like to, put on that they don't understand what the person's talking about. And so I realized, well, maybe there's a lot of people in the room that actually had no idea what that person was talking about. And part of it wasn't so much that they couldn't understand, it's just that they weren't clear. right? Or they didn't walk the person through from the very basic steps. And these are people at JPL, right? And so I remember we were given a tour to, I think it was some sort of politician type of person, and in the Starshade lab. Starshade is this engineering marvel that's supposed to unfurl, and it looks like a flower petal, and it kind of goes out a long ways away from a telescope, and it basically blocks out the light, like one of these bright lights, blocks out the bright light of a star so that you can see the planets that are going around it. And they went through this whole thing like for half an hour about exoplanets and how we're going to see them all, and at the very end of it, the person said, "Oh, what's an exoplanet?" You know, and I was like, "Oh man, you know, we didn't even we didn't bring them into it, right? Like we had to. You can't assume anyone knows anything, right? And even if they're at JPL or if they're just the normal everyday person off the street, they don't know what Jupiter is compared to Mars. You know, they don't know there's what a solar system is composed of necessarily. We all just assume that, and we can't just assume that, right? And just another side of things, we do a lot of working with the new mission formulation people. Those are the people that are developing new missions for the future and hopefully going to pitch them to NASA to become a mission someday. And most of them don't, but every once in a while we win one. And like Juno was a mission like that where we worked with them, and usually at that very beginning stages they want like a cover for their proposal, and they want to show like the object, the widget, the thing that the engineering marvel that they've been working on. But NASA and us, you know, the people paying for the thing aren't paying for that widget. They're paying for what it means, and why should I care? And so that's usually the first question we always ask the main scientists, the PIs on these missions is like, why should I care about this thing? And many times that catches them off guard because they've been talking to all their peers about, you know, the science traceability matrix and like why these things matter within the decadal survey, but like why should every human care about this thing? And usually it kind of brings in, it helps them understand their own mission better. Like why are they doing this thing, and why should you know their neighbor care about it? And one last little phrase that I love, one of my mentors at art school said that when everyone zigs, you should zag. So I'll leave that one out.
You know, as one artist working at my table with my blinders on and my headphones, you know, there's not a lot that I can do or even have time to do in getting my stuff out into the world. I mean, in the past I've relied on publishers, you know, who would commission a piece of art and it would get published, and that's how it would get out into the world, okay? I mean, today, yes, I can put stuff up on a website or, you know, post my latest creation on Facebook, and that attracts the people who are interested in this sort of thing. You know, I've joined up with a number of online groups about you know, space modeling and space art and science fiction films and all of this. So you know, as one guy, I've kind of sat back and looked at this as sort of a, you know, a big social happening. Where people are coming out of the woodwork, at least, you know, from my perspective, they're coming out of the woodwork. They're finding my stuff and they're finding the artwork created by my colleagues, and we have continued a lot of different conversations. And again, as I mentioned, with the split personality, I'm also involved in talking to people about Star Trek and other science fiction, you know, films and creations, you know, I find myself spending more time on the computer, you know, replying to cool questions than I am actually, you know, creating artwork. But you know, I've got to flip that, and I just find it, you know, amazing, you know, just to step back and see you know, there are print publications, there are online productions, audiobooks, there's all of this content. You know, you talked about there being so much of it. I've really had to kind of like, you know, hack into all of these layers of content and find things that say, hey, ooh, that looks really cool. You know, and get into very selected, you know, bits of online material and Netflix and the whole 9 yards. But I will say one thing. You know, Pascal, you talked about portraying the science and the tech correctly in film. Okay, what did you think of the BBC Journey to the Planets? Did you see that?
I think I saw one episode, and I remember that was really good. Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, I've stuck.
For example, Nat Geo's Mars, I don't think that was good, you know, for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
I'll just say that.
But I tell you, when I saw the BBC, that BBC Journey to the Planets, I was like, oh my God, this is really something. You know, so I mean, there's a lot of great stuff out there, and you know, fortunately, yes, you know, it's out there, and we can dig around and look for it.
So I just want to ask a question. Journey to the Planets was the docudrama, right? Yeah. Because the thing that left, the impression I was left with after the Nat Geo Mars show and so many others is space is rotten. It hates you. It doesn't want you to be here. You're going to be miserable. People are going to go crazy and walk out of airlocks that don't have any kind of interlock mechanism. Oh, and by the way, the circuit board that's out of your Apple II from 1986 that controls the landing gear on the spaceship is all the way down at the end of the tunnel. I mean, really? So I want space to be a happy experience. And you know, you talk to the guys in the Apollo program and beyond, they had a really good time. So I don't know where this misery comes from. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. Your turn.
Could I throw on to that I got to talk to one of the actors on Mars who I won't name, and he brought this up, but he said, they told us to play very, very stoic, which is generally the direction that I think people get when they're playing astronauts and scientists. And he said, the scientists we met were fun and dorky, and I wish I could play that. And I think it was reflected in the tone that you're talking about of the whole show. I think we need more dorky, fun scientists in these docudramas.
Yeah, people don't realize that.
Because the astronauts we know personally are so stoic, right?
People get that image
very
in their
accurate.
head. People get that image in their head of the right stuff, not realizing that nowadays that's the wrong stuff. We need people that are very social and are able to get along with each other and that sort of thing. So
well, and you
yeah,
guys do that in your show, by the way. It is a very fun show.
Thank you, thank you. And my answer is kind of 3 tiers to this, which you guys have already touched on quite a bit. But you have to keep it cool. And what does that mean? You have to understand what your demographic is, because what might be cool for millennials isn't going to be cool for, you know, your 55 to 65 who are former engineers. However, in this new age that we're in now, in very short attention spans, it doesn't hurt to keep things short and concise and constantly be doing your elevator pitch. If you're always doing your elevator pitch and have that refined down to its own science, you're going to get your point across. And whether or not you're talking to a child, a millennial, or someone who is in the know, as long as you can capture that imagination, you're fine. Then you can go into details and until they have a headache about whatever your project is. So you got to keep it cool, and you have to use all of your available media to do that. The visuals, the audio. Pascal's video that we saw just a few minutes ago, if it had just been a narration of, oh, here's our Mars base camp that is on an island. No, instead you had some really cool music, and I'm sitting here grooving along to it, just like, yeah, I want to go to that place, that's awesome. You know, so all of those combined visuals, music is extremely important, and being able to have your message quick and concise and to the point that anyone could understand and would give them that little taste for wanting a little bit more. And so all those things combined is very hard to do. No one person can do that by themselves. So the most important thing, in my opinion, of how we can spread the gospel of spaceflight is collaboration. Collaboration, cross-pollination, we all need to be collaborating with each other. We all need to be promoting each other. We all need to be doing projects with each other. We need to be going on each other's radio shows. We need to be going on each other's video shows. We need to be involved with people's artwork and their different projects, however we can, because we're all believers here. And we all want this message to get across to the general public that this is really cool. We've all had that moment where it clicked for us. Whatever it was, whether seeing a rocket launch live or finding about the ALS studies at the space station to have a cure for ALS, which your mother has, whatever that moment was for you in particular, that moment is there for everyone. And for a lot of people, that moment was Starman and the Tesla being launched with Falcon Heavy, so that was a huge help. But there's lots of moments like that, and we might not exactly be aware of what that is for everyone. So, sorry to drag on here, but we have to collaborate with each other. We have to push that as much as possible, and we have to keep things clear and concise.
So, Geoff, you brought me to a realization, which was that if Star Trek: The Next Generation was still airing today, Data's cat would have 2 million followers on Instagram. Right?
Including me.
Including, yeah, me too. So, but there's an important point in that. I wish that it was enough. It goes a long ways. I wish it was enough just to tell people's stories or let them help them tell their stories and make it personal and have fun with it. Show people how thrilled, what fun we're having with this stuff. I wish that was enough, and it's almost enough, but you do have to be out there. You have to be doing the kind of collaboration that you just talked about, but also in all of these other media, like, God forbid, Instagram, that are available to us now. You have to do it judiciously. I have a little help with that because I've got an organization behind me, so, tougher for somebody who's entirely on their own and really is, stuck back in the 70s like I am. These are tools that we can all make use of to our advantage to tell the story that we want to tell. But I think the biggest part of it is, as you've heard from others, sharing that passion and how much fun this is. I'm so glad that you said what you did about the Nat Geo show, because I was so enthusiastic. I went to their big opening, months before it started in Beverly Hills. I thought, God, this is going to be great. And the documentary stuff was okay. It was pretty good. And then here are these poor people on the Red Planet. First of all, I'll ignore the technical stuff, like the crazy man who has a door out of his little greenhouse that opens outward and evacuates most of the station. It's that these people are the first on Mars, and not one of them says, "Holy Mother of God, I'm on Mars!" It never happens. They just look depressed. And that's not what we need, and I hope they do a better job in the second season.
Is there anyone from Nat Geo here today?
So I realize the clock is ticking, so I'll say something really quickly about older people and younger people. Older people. To be fair to National Geographic, I think part of what the documentary suffers from is something that is shared by a number of other documentaries that preceded this particular one. And my little pet peeve is the youth of the crew. A crewed mission to Mars will have mostly older people, mainly because the crew will be small, a group of 5 to 8 people max. The crew will have to be highly skilled. We're not talking about jacks of all trades, we're talking about aces of many trades. Each person will have had to have a lot of experience doing a lot of things. You want your surgeon to probably also be the biologist, to also be the dentist, to also be the spacesuit repair guy, and maybe also the plumber. And for you to be good at these things, I'll recommend that you apply the Malcolm Gladwell outliers rule, which is you need 10,000 hours of doing something, which, if you do the math, is from 9 to 5 a.m. working, that's 7 years of experience doing something. You want from your pilot 10,000 hours of flying time because by then the pilot is a really good pilot and good at what they do. So you want each person on this crew to Mars to be highly skilled and experienced in several things. For that to be possible, no matter how smart they are, they have to have had years of training and doing those things. And so, to me, a typical age for crew member to Mars will likely be mid-50s to mid-60s, if not a little older. Not to mention the benefits from being more resilient and caring less about radiation exposure at that age as well. The epitome to me of a Mars astronaut is Peggy Whitson, who just finished her nth mission on the ISS, is now, I think, 64 years old. This is exactly, I think, the typical profile of a crew member on a mission to Mars. And they might have the token young person to make fun with and to carry the really heavy stuff. But you're not going to see a young crew on a mission to Mars like it's always portrayed in sci-fi movies. So that's the older people. For the young people, all I can say is that I think we really have a big responsibility with all media. I agree with everything I heard earlier. I would also recommend we focus on educating young people. And in the reality of spaceflight, the more I personally learned as a kid about the reality of spaceflight and how space worked and how physics worked, the more I thought it was interesting. So TV programming, for example, for kids needs to have a lot more educational content than what I occasionally catch when I watch my little nephews or friends watch TV shows. There's often zero science content, and then when there is some science content, it's usually off. So all I can say is that there's a lot to be done there, and I think with some more real science at a young age in young people, you will make a mission to Mars happen sooner.
Okay, so talking a little bit about this balance. So talking a little bit about this balance about facts versus talking to people's hearts. I mean, we need to do both. I do a book every year at JPL fancifully called JPL Technical Highlights 2016, 2017, 2017, 2018. And for that book, nice title, huh? Gives you a little work on that. For that book, I interview 30 to 35 scientists or principal investigators and talk about their stories. And these people have been working on these projects. It might be how to do an orbital rendezvous around Mars to transfer samples from one vessel to another to bring them back to Earth for investigation without contaminating the outside of the vessel. I mean, they might have been working on this for 10 years. So here I come walking in there. I like to give them an hour to talk about it just out of respect, but really it doesn't take that long to get the key story. I think you guys have been through this many times. So you walk and say, okay, look, these stories are each 300 to 400 words. I need the TV guide description of what you're doing. And if they're young PIs, they go, the what? And I say, Scholastic Highlights, Twitter? Oh, okay, got it. So, we try and get it down to about triple or quadruple the length of a tweet. And it's tough. So I say, tell me what's meaningful to you about this? What's exciting? What's going to reach the audience? And about half of them are really good. And they could just write the article and I could step out of the room. The other half start reaching for their dry markers and their hands are quivering because they really want to put a graph or an equation on the board. And I'm going, no. You can only use words. We're only using words here. No pictures, no graphs, no numbers. They start freaking out. So it's a tough question. So I guess the last thing I'd like to leave us with is a question that I asked a couple of those guys who were really starting to come unglued. I took a moment and I said, what makes this beautiful to you? And in a lot of cases, that's what caused the glue to break and they were able to actually start talking. So I'd like the audience, we've only got a few minutes left, to think about the difference between what gets you excited about the facts and figures. We've seen NASA spin-off publications for 60 years. And they're about as effective now as they were then. They're good, and they should be out there, but I think their utility is long past. We need to really talk more about what's beautiful about all this, and I think that's what Elon Musk did with the Tesla Roadster and Starman. So before we close out, does anybody have any questions? Because I would love for you to leave this session having a stronger idea of how you can communicate to the people that are important to you, whether it's a classroom full of STEM kids, your neighbors, your spouse, who yawns and looks at the ceiling when you start talking about space, or maybe I'm just talking about mine. But in any case, we want to be able to communicate the story as effectively as possible because that's, I think, why most of us are here. So does anybody have any questions?
Right here. Okay.
Sorry, we got one ahead.
When you were discussing what the representation of people in those kind of environments, now I'm not an astronaut, but I work in rocket engine test. And people act different at different times. When you're sitting around the stand waiting for something to get fixed, people are talking about Kerbal Space and they're laughing and joking and having a great time. The minute the guy says, on test, you're all stoic, stone-faced, and on what you're doing. Very, very focused. It changes like a light bulb. And if there's something starts going wrong, everybody is there for their team. And it's very close to what it would be like in the military. You're fooling around, you're going out to the bar, you go out into combat, it's a whole different situation. So that's something I think people should keep in mind in those representations.
But what's missing in what you just said is that when they are on task, there is tremendous dramatic tension in that. I was at a launch last Thursday out in the Mojave, a little test by Maston, and the team was all business when it was going on, but man, it was great drama.
And I think when you leave out that section about them going to the bar later, you put up a barrier, because most people, when you talk to them, you know, when I say I work at NASA, they think it's a different class of human beings. And I'm not saying you don't have to be smart or talented, but you are a human being. And leaving out, if you only portray the stoic part or the part where they're doing some incredibly intense computation, you put up a barrier.
A lot of people love those stories of, you know, the bar afterwards and the humanizing of them. Oh, they are just like me. This might be this brilliant person, but they, you know, some of the favorite highlights is people is looking at the old Apollo transcripts whenever they had a hot mic and they're cursing, complaining about this or that, and they're just like, wow, Gene Cernan's just like me. So yeah, that's very important.
Cliff? I don't know how many of you remember a pilot for a television show called Plymouth. They even had Pete Conrad do a cameo role as working the airlock for the first colony on the moon. And I thought it would be a great show, and it was a pilot, it went nowhere. We see all these shows on television of a fairly distant science fictional future that is exciting, and we've solved all this stuff, but we don't seem to manage to get a show that's exciting about the near future and convey the adventure of the next 50 years, and I wonder why you all think that is.
I think, if I may, that it's because a lot of the, and especially mainstream media coverage over the past several years, considers right now the in-between between that futuristic high technology future to be boring. They think that the in-between is boring, and until you, like I was saying, you have that moment of realization of like, wow, how amazing is the International Space Station? This is the modern wonder of the world. Until you have that moment, it's going to be boring. So I think that a lot of people, including filmmakers and media specialists, don't want to focus on that period of time, that transitional period of time, because they think it's boring and they feel like they need to Hollywoodize it, like this Nat Geo that we've been criticizing, and give all this unnecessary drama regardless of if the science is thrown out the window or not. That's what I think.
I want to see some more episodes of The Expanse.
And by the way, the Expanse team will be here tomorrow night. Or tonight. No, sorry, tonight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were just going to have Kaz Anvar, but he decided to bring along 5 of his buddies, so we now got the whole crew, and we'll find out whether Amazon picked them up or not.
All right.
I'm getting the flashing red light, which means I only have time for 7 more questions. I'm just kidding, Mike. Can we do 2? Okay. Dave, you got a whole cluster over here. Okay.
I want to thank the panel. Thanks, Rod, for doing this. This is an extremely important topic. One of NSS's strategic imperatives is outreach, getting the word out to the rest of the population about the importance of the time we live in and where space fits into it. To pick up on the last question, so much of what we've talked about is exploration, long-term futures, exoplanets. That's very important. So much is happening right now in changing the way people live their lives because of space. Think of GPS, think of communication satellites, think of remote sensing, think of the new businesses that are being born right now. Can we talk a little bit about what this group can do to help make people more aware of where their careers could go, where their investments could go, how they could dedicate their time, how their lives are now being changed by what's happening today in this revolutionary period of space development. And to put a plug on that, I want to encourage everybody to look for Rod's next book, which he's doing with NSS, talking about some of these transitions. And hopefully, Rod, you can say a few words about that.
And I was just going to say, while you were talking, Stan, I felt like I was reading the notes you had on the side of the manuscript of the book saying, don't forget today, don't forget GPS, don't forget banking. So Stan was more or less single-handedly, with some other help from some other important people, responsible for getting the Space 2.0 book funded and running. So thank you very much for doing that. And that will be out in, I think, about March 2019. It's not specifically a book for the NSS. It's branded for the NSS on the cover because I wanted to get the word out there that we exist and we're doing important things on books, because we're in a lot of other places but not books. But this is really a book for the rest of the population to bring them into our tent. So it's for both parties, but specifically for that. Okay, so anybody want to take that?
For this group, I would really like to remind people about the importance of individual interaction. It is so incredibly valuable for young people just to meet someone in the field and see that that is a person. Science can be an isolated field. I didn't grow up with any scientists in my life, and once I started to meet them and then meet science communicators, it just made the path so much clearer. So I know that, you know, we're talking about big media, about Twitter accounts with millions of followers and listeners and major motion pictures, but those individual interactions are so important, and smaller interactions, and you may not see the impact that you're having right away, but literally just meeting kids and meeting people and showing them that, you know, people take this path is extremely important.
To answer that, and to also give a little bit of a shameless plug, the channel I work for, TMRO, we only have about 20,000 subscribers, but the reason that I am here is because I want to talk to several people that are in this room and even on this stage here to try to get more exposure out there, to get your story out there. I'm going to be doing interviews all the rest of today and tomorrow, so if any of you guys out there, especially if you have a good idea or you're trying to get your company started or you have some really cool thing and you just don't know where to move forward, come talk to me. Let me interview you. Tell me about your passion. Let's get it out there and get some exposure. This is what I'm talking about with cross-collaboration. Let's all work together to make our future possible.
Same pitch, by the way. Good move. Yeah, I'm going to get a great radio show out of doing all of this today. Planetary.org/radio. Every one of us started life as a scientist. I have a 2-year-old grandson now. He's a scientist. He wants to explore. He wants to know how this works. What happens if I put dirt in my mouth? That's science. My boss, the science guy, says, if you don't fire that by the time they're 10, you've lost them. So it's reaching out to young people in particular. Yeah, you have to have your pat answer. You've got to be able to answer that question that Rod brought up. You know, well, we've got so many other things to spend money on. Well, yeah, we do, but it's not either or. You have to have a great answer for why what we all want to see happen is so important, because there are really good answers to that question and the others that people bring up. But it's the outreach to young people. Get them while they're young, and you've got them for life. And I really think that's probably the most important thing we can do, because they're the ones who are going to be making the decisions later on. And don't make assumptions about people. Some of the most fervent fans of space exploration that I have met are conservative Republican congresspeople.
So we've got to wrap this up, but I would just say for anybody talking, especially younger groups of kids, when they ask about why the space race matters, tell them the first one got them this thing, which is where they live, and we don't know what the next one will bring, but it's going to be sensational. Let's have a round of applause for our panel. They're wonderful. Thank you very much. And if anybody has questions or wants to continue the conversation, we've got to move it outside because we've got a youth plenary coming in right after us, so I'm sure we'll be hanging around out there for a bit. Thank you.